15 islands that belong to the wrong country. There are places on Earth where borders seem simple when you look at a map, but the reality on the ground tells a completely different story. Mountains, rivers, and oceans have divided nations for centuries, yet sometimes geography creates situations so unusual that an island can feel like it belongs to one country while officially being controlled by another. Some islands are separated from their own nation by hundreds or even thousands of kilometers of ocean. Others sit just a few minutes away from a neighboring country, but remain under a completely different flag because of historical agreements, colonial decisions, wars, or political compromises made generations ago. These islands create some of the strangest situations in the world. You can stand on a beach and look across the water at another country, sometimes closer than the nation that officially owns the land. Some residents share languages and cultures with nearby countries, but legally belong somewhere else. Others have become symbols of complicated history, showing how borders are not always created by nature, but by decisions made by people. Today, we are exploring islands that seem like they belong to the wrong country, places where geography, history, and politics created some of the most unusual borders on Earth. Greenland. When most people look at a map of the world, Greenland appears connected to North America. It sits between the Arctic and Atlantic Oceans, much closer to Canada than Europe, and its landscape, wildlife, and climate all feel naturally connected to the Arctic regions surrounding it. Yet politically, Greenland belongs to the Kingdom of Denmark, a country thousands of kilometers away across the North Atlantic. Greenland is the largest island in the world, covering an enormous area dominated by ice sheets, glaciers, and some of the harshest environments on Earth. Its population is small compared with its size, with most people living along the coastline where fishing communities have existed for generations. The island's indigenous Inuit culture has deep connections to the Arctic environment, creating an identity that is very different from the European nation that governs it. The reason Greenland belongs to Denmark goes back centuries. Norse settlers arrived in Greenland around the medieval period, and later Denmark became the dominant European power connected to the island. Over time, Greenland developed a closer political relationship with Denmark, eventually becoming part of the Danish realm. Today, Greenland has significant self-government, controlling many of its own domestic affairs while Denmark handles areas such as foreign policy and defense. What makes Greenland fascinating is the contrast between its physical location and political identity. If you were dropped into Greenland without knowing the map, you would probably assume it belonged to another Arctic nation. It feels connected to Canada and the wider Arctic world, yet its official ties lead back to a European country across the ocean. It is one of the clearest examples of how history can create borders that geography alone would never suggest. Bajo Nuevo Bank. Deep in the Caribbean Sea lies a tiny, remote island territory that creates one of the strangest ownership situations in the Americas. Bajo Nuevo Bank is a small group of reefs and islands located far from the mainland, surrounded by clear tropical waters. If you looked at its location, you might expect it to belong to a nearby Caribbean country, but officially, it is controlled by Colombia. The unusual part is that Bajo Nuevo Bank is much closer to countries like Jamaica and Nicaragua than it is to Colombia. It sits in a region where multiple nations have competing historical claims, making it part of a complicated story involving colonial boundaries, maritime rights, and international agreements. For most people, this place is not a typical island destination. It does not have large cities, famous beaches, or a major population. Instead, it is mainly known because of its strategic location in the Caribbean. Small islands and reefs like this may seem insignificant, but they can become extremely important because ownership determines control over surrounding waters and possible resources. Colombia's claim comes from historical connections and later agreements that recognized its control over several Caribbean territories. The situation shows how modern borders are not always based on distance or cultural connection. Sometimes a tiny piece of land in the middle of the ocean can become part of a country simply because of historical events that happened centuries earlier. Bajo Nuevo Bank is a reminder that maps are often more complicated than they appear. A small island surrounded by nations that seem geographically closer can still belong to a country much farther away, because international borders are shaped by history as much as geography. Clipperton Island. Far away in the eastern Pacific Ocean sits Clipperton Island, a small tropical island that feels like it should belong to a nearby Latin American country. Located thousands of kilometers away from mainland France, this isolated piece of land is officially French territory. The island is one of the most remote places connected to France. It is closer to Mexico than Europe, and its tropical environment looks completely different from the landscapes most people associate with France. Yet because of historical claims dating back to the colonial era, Clipperton became part of the French Republic. The island has a fascinating and sometimes tragic history. For years, different countries showed interest in controlling it because of its strategic location and natural resources. At one point, a small community lived there while attempting to extract valuable materials, but the settlement eventually collapsed after supply problems left residents isolated. The harsh conditions transformed Clipperton into a symbol of how difficult life can be on remote islands. Today, the island is mostly uninhabited, with seabirds, marine life, and a unique ecosystem dominating the landscape. Despite its tiny size, it remains important because of the surrounding ocean territory it provides France. Standing on Clipperton Island would create a strange feeling. The sand, climate, and nearby countries all suggest a tropical Pacific location. But legally, you are standing on French soil. It is one of those places where the idea of a country becomes much more complicated than simply looking at where the land happens to sit on the map. Saint Pierre and Miquelon. Just off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada, sits a small group of islands that look like they should naturally be part of North America. Instead, Saint Pierre and Miquelon are overseas territories belonging to France. These islands are among the last remaining pieces of French territory in North America, creating a unique cultural mix where European traditions exist only a short distance from Canada. The islands have French streets, French cuisine, French currency, and French government systems, even though they are surrounded by a completely different country. The history goes back to the era when France and Britain competed for control of North America. Over centuries of conflicts and treaties, many French territories disappeared, but Saint Pierre and Miquelon remained under French control. The islands became an important location for fishing, especially during the historic cod fishing industry in the Atlantic. Today, life there feels like a small piece of France placed beside Canada's coastline. Residents can look across the ocean and see Newfoundland, yet they live under French administration. The landscape, weather, and geography connect them strongly to North America, but their identity remains deeply French. This unusual situation shows how history can leave behind unexpected borders. A person standing on Saint Pierre and Miquelon is physically in North America but politically in France, proving that national identity is not always determined by location alone. Bermuda. When people imagine Bermuda, they often picture a tropical island paradise somewhere in the Caribbean. The reality is much more surprising. Bermuda is located in the North Atlantic Ocean, far away from the Caribbean, and it is officially a British overseas territory. The island sits much closer to the United States than to the United Kingdom, yet it remains connected to Britain because of centuries of colonial history. Its famous pink sand beaches, clear waters, and distinctive culture have made it one of the most recognizable island destinations in the world. Bermuda's British connection began in the early 17th century, when English settlers arrived on the islands. Over time, the territory developed its own unique identity, blending British influences with local traditions and the realities of island life. What makes Bermuda especially interesting is how different it feels from the country it belongs to. The United Kingdom is known for rainy weather, historic cities, and European landscapes, while Bermuda offers turquoise waters, coral reefs, and a subtropical climate. If someone visited without knowing its political status, they might never guess it had a connection to Britain. The island represents one of the clearest examples of how colonial history shaped the modern map. Today, Bermuda remains a British territory, but its location makes it feel like a separate world thousands of kilometers away from the nation that governs it. Easter Island. Floating alone in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, Easter Island is one of the most famous isolated islands on Earth. Known for its enormous moai statues created by the ancient Rapa Nui people, the island feels completely separate from the rest of the world. Yet despite being located thousands of kilometers from South America, Easter Island belongs to Chile. The island's location makes the political connection surprising. It is one of the most remote inhabited places on the planet, far closer to other Pacific islands than to mainland Chile. Its Polynesian culture, language, and history are deeply connected to the Pacific rather than South America. Chile annexed Easter Island in the 19th century, and since then it has remained part of the country. The island's relationship with Chile has been complex, involving discussions about cultural preservation, land rights, and the protection of Rapa Nui heritage. The moai statues have made Easter Island internationally famous, but the island is much more than an archaeological destination. It represents the survival of a unique culture in one of the most isolated environments on Earth. Visitors often describe arriving there as stepping into another world because the landscape, history, and traditions feel unlike anywhere else. Easter Island perfectly demonstrates how political borders can sometimes ignore geography and culture. It is a Polynesian island in the middle of the Pacific, yet officially part of a South American nation thousands of kilometers away. Hainan Island. Hainan Island is often described as China's tropical paradise, but its history makes it an interesting example of how islands can develop identities different from the countries they belong to. Located in the South China Sea, Hainan is geographically closer to Southeast Asia than many parts of mainland China. The island has tropical forests, beaches, mountains, and a climate completely different from much of China. For centuries, its distance from the mainland allowed Hainan to develop its own unique cultural characteristics, influenced by various ethnic groups and maritime connections. Today, Hainan is officially part of China and has become a major tourism and economic center. Cities such as Sanya attract visitors with beaches, resorts, and tropical landscapes. However, its location creates the feeling of a separate world, almost like an island nation rather than a regular part of a massive continental country. Hainan shows that even when an island belongs clearly to one nation, geography can create a different identity. Its tropical environment, ocean connections, and unique history make it feel distinct from many other parts of China. These islands prove that borders are often far more complicated than they appear on a map. Some belong to countries across oceans, some carry cultures different from the nations that govern them, and others exist because of historical decisions made hundreds of years ago. Geography may tell one story, but history often writes another. Socotra Island. Standing in the Arabian Sea, far away from most major population centers, Socotra Island feels like a place that belongs to another planet rather than another country. With strange-looking dragon blood trees, unique wildlife, and landscapes unlike anywhere else on Earth, Socotra appears completely separate from the world around it. Geographically, many people might expect it to be connected to countries on the African side of the sea or nearby Arabian regions, but officially, the island belongs to Yemen. Socotra sits closer to the Horn of Africa than to much of mainland Yemen, and its isolation has allowed a remarkable ecosystem to develop. Many plants and animals found there exist nowhere else on Earth, making the island one of the most biologically unique places in the world. Its landscapes include white sand beaches, limestone mountains, caves, and forests filled with unusual species that seem almost prehistoric. The island's connection to Yemen comes from centuries of historical ties. For generations, Socotra was influenced by different civilizations because of its location along important maritime routes. Traders traveling between Africa, Arabia, and Asia passed through the region, bringing cultural influences that shape the island's identity. What makes Socotra especially fascinating is the contrast between its natural world and political identity. The island feels like a hidden Pacific-style paradise, but it is officially part of a country located on the Arabian Peninsula. Its language, traditions, and isolated environment have created a culture unlike many other places in the region. Today, Socotra is recognized as one of the world's most extraordinary natural environments. The island reminds us that political borders do not always match the character of the land itself. Sometimes a place can feel completely separate from the nation it belongs to, simply because geography created a different path. Chagos Archipelago. Deep in the Indian Ocean lies one of the most politically complicated island groups in the world, the Chagos Archipelago. These tropical islands have beautiful beaches, clear waters, and incredible marine ecosystems, but their history involves one of the most controversial territorial disputes of modern times. Today, the islands are administered by the United Kingdom as the British Indian Ocean Territory, while Mauritius claims sovereignty over them. The location of the Chagos Islands makes the situation unusual. They are much closer to countries in the Indian Ocean region than to Britain, a nation thousands of kilometers away. The islands were historically connected to Mauritius during the period of British colonial rule, but later became a separate territory. One of the most significant events in the island's history occurred in the 20th century, when the local population was removed from Diego Garcia, the largest island, to allow the construction of a major military facility. This created a long-running dispute involving questions of sovereignty, human rights, and the future of the territory. Despite the political controversy, the natural beauty of the Chagos Archipelago is undeniable. The islands contain some of the world's most impressive coral reefs and marine environments. Their isolation has helped preserve ecosystems that have disappeared in many other parts of the ocean. The Chagos Islands demonstrate how a small group of islands can become important far beyond their size. Their story is not only about geography, but about how global politics can shape the lives of people connected to a distant piece of land. The Falkland Islands. Few islands demonstrate the complexity of borders and ownership better than the Falkland Islands. Located in the South Atlantic Ocean, the islands are officially a British overseas territory, but Argentina also claims sovereignty over them. Their location makes the situation even more unusual because they sit much closer to South America than to the United Kingdom. The Falkland Islands are located about 500 kilometers from Argentina's coast, while Britain is thousands of kilometers away. From a purely geographic perspective, many people might assume they naturally belong to Argentina. However, history created a different reality, with British administration becoming established during the 19th century. The islands became internationally known because of the Falklands War in 1982, when Argentina and the United Kingdom fought over control of the territory. The conflict lasted only a few months, but had a lasting impact on both countries and remains an important part of their national histories. Beyond politics, the Falkland Islands have a unique environment filled with dramatic landscapes, penguin colonies, and wildlife adapted to the harsh South Atlantic climate. The islands feel more connected to remote ocean wilderness than to either country that claims them. The Falklands represent one of the clearest examples of how geography and history can disagree. Looking at a map raises one question, but understanding centuries of events reveals a much more complicated answer. Guam. Located in the western Pacific Ocean, Guam is another island where geography and political identity tell different stories. The island is much closer to Asia than the United States, yet it is an organized territory of the United States. Guam sits in the Micronesian region of the Pacific and has a culture deeply influenced by the indigenous Chamorro people, Spanish colonial history, and American connections. Its location makes it a strategically important island, especially because it sits along major routes between Asia and the Pacific. The United States gained control of Guam after the Spanish-American War in the late 19th century. Since then, the island has remained connected to the United States, developing a unique identity that combines Pacific traditions with American influence. For visitors, Guam can feel like a mixture of worlds. The beaches and tropical environment look like a Pacific island paradise, while American businesses, infrastructure, and military presence create a different atmosphere. It is a place where someone can be surrounded by ocean landscapes while technically being under American administration. Guam shows how islands can become important because of location rather than size. A small piece of land in the middle of the Pacific can influence global strategy, transportation, and international relationships. The Isle of Man. Located between Great Britain and Ireland, the Isle of Man creates an interesting situation because many people assume it belongs directly to either the United Kingdom or Ireland. However, it is actually a self-governing crown dependency with a unique constitutional relationship with the British Crown. The island has its own government, laws, and cultural identity, including the revival of the Manx language. Its history stretches back thousands of years, with influences from Celtic and Norse cultures creating a heritage different from its larger neighbors. Geographically, the Isle of Man feels like a natural part of the British Isles. It sits in the Irish Sea and is surrounded by countries that share many cultural connections. Yet politically, it exists in a separate category that makes it neither fully part of the United Kingdom nor an independent country. The island is famous for its dramatic landscapes, historic sites, and the legendary Isle of Man TT motorcycle race, one of the most challenging racing events in the world. It combines traditional island life with a strong sense of independence. The Isle of Man proves that not every unusual border involves thousands of kilometers of distance. Sometimes the most confusing political situations exist right in the middle of familiar places. Christmas Island. Far out in the Indian Ocean, Christmas Island is another territory that surprises many people. Located much closer to Indonesia than Australia, this tropical island is officially an external territory of Australia. The island is famous for its incredible wildlife, especially the annual migration of millions of red crabs moving from the forests to the coast. This natural event transforms the island into a spectacular display of life that attracts visitors from around the world. Despite its location near Southeast Asia, Christmas Island became connected to Australia through historical administration. Its geography creates a unique combination of Asian and Australian influences, with a multicultural population shaped by different waves of migration. The island's remote location has helped preserve its natural environment. Dense forests, coral reefs, and unique species make it an important conservation area. Yet politically, it remains connected to a country thousands of kilometers away. Christmas Island is another example of how islands often develop identities that do not perfectly match their official borders. Nature creates one story, while history creates another. Svalbard. High above the Arctic Circle sits Svalbard, a remote island group that creates one of the world's most unusual territorial arrangements. Located much closer to the North Pole than to mainland Europe, Svalbard is officially part of Norway. The islands are famous for glaciers, polar bears, dramatic mountains, and extreme Arctic conditions. They feel completely separate from the rest of Norway, which is hundreds of kilometers away and has a much warmer climate. What makes Svalbard especially unusual is its international status. Under the Svalbard Treaty, citizens from several countries have certain rights to live and work there. This creates a rare situation where a Norwegian territory has an international presence unlike almost anywhere else. The islands became important because of coal mining, scientific research, and their strategic Arctic location. Today, Svalbard is known for research stations, adventure tourism, and its incredible natural environment. Standing in Svalbard feels like standing at the edge of the planet. Everything about it suggests isolation, yet it remains connected to Norway through history and international agreements. From tropical islands in the Indian Ocean to frozen landscapes near the Arctic, these places show how complicated the world's borders truly are. Some islands belong to countries far away, others exist because of historical agreements, and some remain the center of debates that continue today. The next time you look at a map, remember that every line represents a story. Behind every unusual border are people, cultures, and events that shape the world we know today. These islands may seem like they belong somewhere else, but their history explains why they carry the flags they do.